Hey guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. Thanks for joining me today. While you're here, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to this on podcast, please make sure to follow. My name is Judy Cho, and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing. And it often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Elizabeth Bright. This is, I think, our third interview, and I will put in the show notes our first and second interview. We've talked about thyroid function and hormone function and the importance of iodine. She is an osteopath that focuses on endocrine function and especially the thyroid and the balance of sex hormones. Dr. Bright is a naturopath and an osteopath and works on potent treatments that support both male and females to get back to root cause healing. Dr. Bright is the author of the book, Good Fats is Good for Women, and she focuses on a high-fat carnivore diet to start healing and supporting the adrenals and thyroid function. In our interview, we talk about a lot of the struggles in mental health and how it is being impacted by our diet and the toxins in our environment. We talk about how adolescents are on medications for anxiety and depression, and how a lot of this is actually impacted by our diet. We talk about the importance of iodine later in the conversation and how not enough iodine can actually cause breast cancer. We also talk about how eating low fat causes depression and anxiety and how it can impact our sex hormones and even our imbalances in our stress response. This conversation isn't the easiest one, but it shares so much about how a simplistic solve can support us so much. We talk about how we started believing certain dietary carbohydrates can fix our hormones. All of this is discussed in this conversation, and that how the easy fix of high fat plus iodine can support so much of all of these imbalances. Let's get right into the interview. Hi, Dr. Bright. It's so good to have you on again. I think this is your third interview with me, and so you are probably the only one that has third interview. So for the people that have not seen you or your videos on my channel yet, if you can introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Elizabeth Bright. I'm an osteopath and naturopath, and I have been using the carnivore diet as a healing modality for 8 years since I went carnivore 8 years ago. And I also specialize in thyroid and adrenal function.
So today we wanted to talk a lot about mental health, anxiety, depression, and just imbalances that we may see in mental health. And we see this epidemic with especially adolescents. I had a client that's in his, I think it was early 20s, and he said that all his friends in Los Angeles, literally all the children in their teens, are on anxiety medications, and it's just normalized. And I know that there's this we should accept everyone culture right now, but I think there's a fine balance of we shouldn't say, oh, it's normal, everyone should get on anxiety meds before trying any other interventions. Do you see this over prescription as an issue? And if you could just share some of your thoughts.
I definitely think we're over prescribing, and unfortunately the diagnoses are also an issue. I also see that a lot of my daughter's friends who are, by the way, as a side note, vegan and vegetarian, are all on antidepressants. So it is definitely overprescribed. The problem with antidepressants is that, and I do want to mention ADHD though during the discussion, because there is a part of it to look at. The problem with antidepressants is that they don't work. They literally, in my book, I cite several references about how they increase suicidal ideation. They all work on the same path, just as benzodiazepines do and antipsychotics do, which is the GABA system. And there's no proof that they work better than placebos for depression. We're going to talk about depression, but they do numb you. But over time, the way the body is made is that their body, if you suppress, so they suppress, right? They are upregulating GABA, which is the calming neurotransmitter, to lower glutamate. But over time, this upregulation will burn out GABA receptors, which is why people who take benzodiazepines have tolerance issues after. They need more. The same goes with cannabis and also certain antidepressants, which in the end causes more anxiety. So this is a huge problem. And the thing about adolescents, I got to put girls sort of in perspective, is that recently, when they used to treat girls, with teenagers with ADHD with Adderall, they're now treating them with HRT. So the boys are still getting Adderall. They're getting Adderall, which is a stimulant, so it lowers brain activity. And they're also getting methylphenidate, which blocks dopamine, which is one of the things we need to talk about today, which is brain overactivity. So we're not fixing anything here. We have to go figure out why there is anxiety. And that's what we're going to talk about today, why there is so much more anxiety in adolescence today. The adolescent brain, the human brain doesn't stop growing until we're in our late 20s. But adolescence is when we're building sexual characteristics. And that's when most of my patients come to me. We realize that the problem started when they were adolescents, but at the age when they're building sexual characteristics. And that's when all the hormones change and the dopamine signaling changes. And that's really a time that is very dangerous, but also a time when specifically girls are not eating fat and they are dieting. And today there's an onslaught of social media. So that's overstimulation. That'll be dopamine, the excitatory neurotransmitter. So it's a huge problem. And the other thing is that during this period of time, adolescents, because I'm not going to call 20s to 28 an adolescent, brain is still developing, but this is with the time when we're building sexual characteristics, is when we need 40% more thyroid hormone and 40% more iodine. Otherwise, all this stuff isn't regulated properly. Cortisol goes up when you're till about 3 months old, and then it drops. And then when you're an adolescent and you start forming sexual characteristics, it rises precipitously again, because there's this huge involvement in estrogen and testosterone and thyroid triggering. Basically, thyroid hormone regulates the building of sexual characteristics. And if people are deficient or inflamed during that period of time, this won't work properly.
When you say that age period, what age group would you say? And then I'm assuming that it's for both male and female, that the sexual orientation and all of that is being formed. And so if you can just walk us through the age, and then how does that all form properly? And then if you can sort of share after, how does this start becoming imbalanced? Because you would think that, and obviously you mentioned fat, but you would think that as young children or adolescents, that their bodies are so fresh and new that everything should work properly. But what is the mechanistic reasons why they don't work and why things can go awry?
Okay, so yes, both sexes, male and female, are forming sexual characteristics. Women have more sexual characteristics to form.
Okay.
So more fat, more iodine, more thyroid hormone in order to be able to do that successfully. I would say, and the other thing is that preteen is when you start to get into trouble, because preteen is when your body is gearing up to make you a fertile being. You're not a fertile being previously, right? You are this formation of sexual characteristics isn't just making breasts and, pubic hair. It's also making estrogen levels and progesterone and all that kind of stuff. So girls in the 1800s, the median age for menstruation was 16. Hunter-gatherer societies, it was 17 and 18. Now it's 9.
9?
Wow. There are menstruating, precocious menstruation at 9. So can you imagine the HPA axis is programmed, we evolved to menstruate at a much later age, but it's happening 5 or 6 years earlier. And we connect this to a high carbohydrate diet. Okay. So estrogens, carbohydrates increase estrogen levels. So girls who are 9, 10, and 11 are going through this menstruation, but their brain and the rest of their HPA axis has not caught up. That's a huge stress.
So what's the downstream effects of that? So if you go through menstruation early, your HPA axis isn't ready.
The hormones are all whacked out. Okay. You will not have proper, I would say downstream amenorrhea. I would say not enough thyroid hormone. I would say that things are inflammatory. Cortisol will go up because, cortisol and estrogen and testosterone, they all work together to form this proper package of development. And if you're menstruating at 9 and you have the brain basically is a 9-year-old and not a 14-year-old, right, or a 15-year-old, you will, things will be awry, as you said. So the levels will be off, and that can cause a huge amount of stress.
So then at what point, and I'm pretty sure I know your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, but at what point should we start eating a lot of fat so that this doesn't go imbalanced?
Probably during childhood, but as I said, you can, or sort of, there's the sweet spot. I don't know what the sweet spot would be, but I'm sure at 5, 6, and 8-year-old is not yet, the hormones have not started to surge yet. So we know that they rise when, and during adolescence, we know that cortisol starts to go up really high, and so does dopamine signaling. And dopamine signaling is involved in this whole process. But if dopamine signaling is to dopamine signaling, which was inhibitory until you're an adolescent, starts becoming excitatory. So that will cause stress and inflammation. But one of the funny things I wanted to, well, funny, they saw that, so they're giving 9-year-olds HRT because they're not learning at school. Okay. So instead, though, they have also figured out that allopregnanolone, which is a metabolite of progesterone, has an antidepressive effect. They figure that, right? So this is something that they have now, it enhances GABA function, but it comes from fat. The hormone cascade, we know, right? Cholesterol will make allopregnanolone. What did they do? They made a synthetic, and they're selling it as Zulresso as an antidepressant. So eat fat.
What fat are they using? Do you know? I'm assuming not animal fat, or is it?
Sterols? Absolutely not. It always comes back to the yams and the.
Oh, right. So obviously, this whole low fat issue is causing these imbalances. How much of that is reflective of our adolescents now struggling with even, I mean, I'm going to just put it out there, even some of the gender identity stuff. Right. How much of that is this impacting, do you think?
Okay, well, the gender identity stuff, I would say that are we talking about the toxins yet, or just?
Yeah, I mean, whatever you would like to set the stage for us to understand, I think for me personally, it's just understanding what is it that's causing all of this mental health imbalances in our adolescents, way more than we've ever had. And now we're just medicating it. And then on top of that, there is a surge. And I know that it's also that people are just being more open and sort of out of the closet, as they say, but how much of that also is an imbalance of the way we've been eating, and the stressors and having our periods way earlier, that now maybe some of the gender stuff is from a dietary imbalance.
Okay, I would say that
the gender toxins. Sorry.
So I think that, okay, so sex is not binary. Sex is sort of sexuality is a spectrum. I don't think that we are just female and just male. Homosexuality has been around forever. There are big kinds of animals who are homosexual, and they even say anthropologically that hunter-gatherers formed homosexual relationships because if you were close to somebody, you had a better survival rate. So all this kind of stuff is part of that. I would definitely say that girls, I think it's more, I think that the diet is very inflammatory. I mean, the boys I see with, breast tissue at the beach, which they didn't have 10 years ago, is going to cause inflammation. I think it will affect their mental health in the sense that their self-esteem and how they see themselves will be affected. I don't think this will change their sexual behavior.
Gotcha. Okay.
Change of sexual behavior could be definitely the xenoestrogens and the toxins and the PFAs and all those things that we're going to talk about. So that stuff, I mean, you can think about, as an example, sex steroids aren't static. Cortisol levels can affect our sex steroids. Athletic pursuits can affect our cortisol levels and our testosterone levels. So women who weight train will temporarily have a higher testosterone rate. Men, they had my husband's a cyclist, so the EPO doping scandal, these guys, all these racers got kicked out because they had high testosterone levels. And then it was figured out that high cortisol levels, and of course these professional racers all have insanely high cortisol levels, had high testosterone levels. And they figured out, oh, it's natural. It wasn't because they were doping. It was because high cortisol will raise testosterone levels. So we have to keep that into picture. And then we have things like I read the sexual testing, sports sex testing in sports is pretty flawed and archaic. I read an article in Sports Illustrated about Caster Semenya, the woman racer who was kicked out because she had high testosterone levels. And this guy said, I mean, she's kicked out for breaking records, and she had invasive testing done to see if she was a female or was a male, right?
Wow.
But she's okay. And this writer said there's a bias, it's almost a racist bias against women who don't look like society expects women to look. So they don't test the girly girls. They don't test their testosterone levels. They don't test. They test the ones who look not like society expects women to look like. So that's it confuses the whole issue. Diets high in soy and yams will raise testosterone levels. That's a phytosterol. That is a synthetic testosterone. So if you're eating yams and soy all the time and you go get tested, you're going to have high testosterone levels because you're full of these synthetic steroid hormones. So going back to your question about what these, I guess, changes made by toxic xenoestrogens and toxic chemicals, yes, there's definitely an increase in intersex people. So people who are born with both female and male genitalia. But the problem here is that the genitalia is non-functioning because the signaling went awry in the sense that they didn't get the xenoestrogens signal the body. Some genes turn off and some turn on, and they just get this mess they have things called blind vaginas. So they're closed and there's no opening. They have rates of male testes not descending, increased endometriosis, infertility, all that. Yes, we can connect that to xenoestrogens and toxic chemicals in our environment.
So where would we get exposed to most of those toxins?
I don't think any of us are not exposed.
Right. But
I mean, years ago. And I think that the xenoestrogens, I'm now telling women not to dye their hair. Oh. There's a hair dye. If at all else, if something isn't working, we're going to have to fix everything. So, or try to address everything. But I don't think we can escape it. I think that our idea I don't know, it is possible that the toxic pollution of xenoestrogens and estrogen disruptors, hormone disruptors, neuroendocrine disruptors could cause a person you could have a person born with one kind of genitalia, but have the sexual behavior of another.
Right.
That may be increased. But it's hard to measure because, as you said, we're more open about it now. And we know sex has never been binary. Sexual behavior has never been binary. I think the issue is that, sex chromosomes, for instance, we're only 5% different than male. Male and female are only 5% different. Otherwise, we have the same chromosomes. So it's that 8-week, the sexual differentiation comes at 8 weeks. So that's when the issue can start. 8 weeks, the body decides, are you going to have this genitalia or that genitalia? How that hormone signaling affects your sexual behavior later on as the brain is developing, there could be some interference. But how are you going to measure that?
Right.
We really figure out, because what we were raised as normal and abnormal can't really be, it's so pervasive, this toxicity. So I would say the best thing we could do is we can't escape this. It's in our environment. So we have to be as healthy as we can, which comes back to diet and iodine, because iodine will actually change abnormal cell growth. Cells that are abnormal will be reprogrammed to be normal with iodine.
Yeah, the first time I heard about the frogs in the waters where they were exposed to some toxins and they changed genders was where it started becoming very eye-opening for me of how important removing a lot of these xenoestrogens and other toxins in like the PFAs in our waters. And so maybe water is one area that we can be mindful of other than our foods. And then if we remove soy and remove the yams, as you said, but other than that, you're right. It is everywhere. I know that it's in the air. I think there was one movie where they talked about measuring blood levels and PFAs in people, and it's literally like 95% of the population has it in their bloodstream. And so it's just pervasive. But I think we can protect ourselves. Yes, maybe not dyeing our hair, but I think the diet and making sure your water is good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we have to, I mean, that's why we have, but you see, you know, what you get some sort of thing that filters your water. I mean, we have a water filter, but it's not as, you know, we don't have access to things like you do in the US with, and they haven't even found anything that can filter xenoestrogens, because xenoestrogens are, how are you going to, you know, how do you, they don't have the technology yet.
Right.
And they call it chemicals. The problems is that the problems of the pharmaceutical companies and the chemical companies, it's always been the measure was all, if it doesn't kill you, it's okay, because your body will only process a little amount of it. And now finally, I think last week or something, or 2 weeks ago, the FDA said they will say that there can be zero amount of PFAAs in water. It's taken, what, 30 years since the DES catastrophe with the grandchildren of women who took diethylstilbetrol to, you know, avoid miscarriage or whatever. These people who were born with cervical cancer, and I mean, just horrific, both male and female. Generations is, you know, that's the hormone signaling that doesn't, that's epigenetic. When you were asking me about genetics, or that's the epigenetic part, is that it's not necessarily that the substance stays in your body, it's that the hormones the signaling has been messed up. It's not regulating properly. And where is this stuff in our body? It's in our fat tissue, isn't it? So the more we can clean out our fat tissue, that's another way. That's why a high-fat carnivore approach would be good, because you're burning through fat. It's not sitting there.
You know, while you're bringing up that fat, there's a question that I always get when we're eating the grain finished animals. So they say, so if we acknowledge all of this stuff we just talked about that would be stored in our own fat, so then when we're not eating grass finished, are the animals storing most of the toxins in the fat, and we're recommending eating high fat? So then are we getting most of the toxins in the animals? And I know that we have our own filtration systems in our own bodies, like our livers and kidneys. And so it's always been a struggle of mine with that answer. I always think if you're going to eat the organs of an animal, it should be a very healthy animal, because you don't know when they're processing the animal, at what part of the filtration the liver was going through that process. What are your thoughts about grain finished fat, and is it safe enough for us to eat?
Well, I think it is. I think it is. I think that apparently we're now eating castrated beef, as opposed to, so apparently the estrogen in so bulls who are not castrated have huge amounts of hormones naturally. And apparently what we're eating is castrated, and the hormone is much less, and that's like 0.02 micrograms of estrogen per kilogram. Whereas if they were eating, and you'd have to eat like, you know, 50K a day, whereas you eat some soy, you know, a little bit of soy flour, you're getting 89 milligrams per 100 grams. So no, I don't think, I've thought about this too a lot, and we actually exchanged emails about it. So I think we're fine. I think we're fine. I think that it's more the products, that the phytoestrogens and the plant sterols that wreak havoc, than the couple of months of grain that the animals eat.
Yeah, and I think the clarification is that all animals, or all cattle, are raised on grass. They couldn't live off of the grain. It's just the last couple months that they eat the grains. And I believe that the antibiotics and the regulations are that all of it has to be out of their system before they are processed. Just like humans, we take antibiotics for a short period, and it's supposed to be out of our system, and that's why we take probiotics and all of these other things. And I think cattle also get sometimes probiotics, but if it was really that detrimental to our health, I think the testing and other things would show that, or demonstrate that, or our hormones would be more adversely impacted as a carnivore, but we don't see that to be true because most people cannot afford to eat just grass finished.
No, I don't tell people to eat grass finished
Okay.
because I think it's fine. It is fine. And what I'm concerned about is the other are the trans fats and the other phytosterols and people taking flax seeds and things like that. That's I'm way more concerned about. And makeup and creams. And I'm always sending people to EWG.org because they're always changing every year the names of the things that people are. I mean, I think that your skin obviously is the organ that absorbs everything, and it is important to put. I mean, I just use tallow, but we do have people have to. The marketing is really hard.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people. Anything that's sort of
Emulsifying
satiny is going to have estrogen in it.
because they never use tallow. Yeah, I struggle with that a lot because I put on makeup for the camera. And so what I do is as soon as the video is over, because even if it's some of the cleaner products, they still have some stuff in it. It's nothing is that 100% foolproof. So what I do is I try to wear makeup as least as possible. That's how I sort of balance it. And so as soon as I'll stop recording this, I'll wash my face and then I'll put on my tallow cream and then I'm hoping that all the other times I'm not wearing makeup, that'll balance it. But I totally understand. That's not, there are brands that are considered healthy and they're not. It's just marketing, and they might be slightly healthier, but the price is like double the price of a conventional makeup that you would find. So it is a struggle, and I absolutely it's a struggle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tallow is a pain in the butt to make, but it is pretty cheap.
Yeah, no, agreed. What do you think is causing the higher increases of suicide? I know it's increasing in all ages, but even in our adolescents.
Oh boy, it's such a big thing. It is increasing in all humans, but I think that adolescents really suffer because they're building a body, they're building the rest. They're at that time of during adolescence is so crucial for your health, mental health, obviously, because all these hormones are bursting. They're bursting. They're, the birds and the bees in the Disney movies. It's all flowers and birds singing, and that this is how it should be. But unfortunately, with all the stress and inflammation that's around and overstimulation, older people are miserable, but younger people are especially miserable because of all this building going on. During adolescence, that's such a crucial time to have adequate health. And you need, if your body by default is going to make you a fertile organism, you got to have fat for that. And I know that when I was 15, I avoided fat like the plague. And the sad thing is that in 2018, a Harvard paper came out and said, oh my God, antidepressant use in the US has gone up by 400% from 1994 to 2008. And females were prescribed 2.5 times more than men. So again, I hate always bringing it back. Boys are suffering too, and absolutely it's a main thing. But the women are getting hit harder, and they're being prescribed antidepressants ages as low as 12. The same time that paper came out, the same year, a paper came out saying that low cholesterol levels cause depression. So it's right there in front of them. Cholesterol enhances serotonin function, which is the thing. Everybody thinks that's the one that's going to solve everything, right? Cholesterol lowers levels of aggression. Adolescents, now male and female, follow a low cholesterol diet. So I would put a lot of the blame on the low cholesterol diet. They lower the ability of teens to make steroid hormones, and they reduce their ability. By not making steroid hormones, they reduce the ability for adolescents to address stress. And health is not the absence of stress. Health is how you address stress. And then there's the part about overstimulation, the phones. I mean, we used to yell about the TV. I wasn't allowed to watch TV, but it's all the way across the room. If you're going to bed with your phone, think of the dopamine signaling that's happening, overstimulation. And another thing I want to mention about this is the sexual dysmorphia, that's body dysmorphia that's going on, that is much more pronounced in female adolescents. And I've been following Jessica Ann Pinn's work recently, and I didn't know that labiaplasty was a thing, and it's the world's fastest growing surgical procedure. So it's not an aesthetic procedure. There are surgeons who have no education in human anatomy who are making young women feel that they are abnormal because they have larger labia minora. And 50% of all women have that. So they're made to feel that there's something wrong with them. And there's a huge market about this. And it's really just racist, misogynistic ideas from the Victorians who told people that if you had it, you were masturbating. And of course, Victorians, oh my God, that was terrible. Or you were promiscuous. And it's just, again, going back to the whole how medicine treats women, that women, there's something wrong with them. Let's find something and make them change it. So depression is, I think that it's harder for girls today. I really do.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the lack of fat and then all these toxins in our environments and then social media with all the filters. I mean, right now I am using a slight filter on Zoom, but it puts this new level of expectation of how you should look. And I hear of girls that want to look like their filter on social media. And so they'll go to a plastic surgeon and say, I want to look like how I look with the filter. And I can see that. I mean, I all of this came around when I was already older, so it doesn't affect me, but I can imagine how that would affect you growing up. And I didn't get as many likes as my high school friend or something, I don't know how it gets affected, but I can see that if they're mindlessly scrolling through the phone and how much it will affect you, because there's so many studies that show the longer you're on social media, the longer you scroll, the worse your self-esteem is and how much and depressed you are. So I can see that because everyone's sharing their best life. And even though people know that, when you're going through that, you don't think that. You just think, man, everyone's living such a good life except for me.
Right, right. And it increases dopamine signaling, which is related to a dopamine. High dopamine is related to schizophrenia, bipolar, depression. And we know from studies that this kind of constant light and triggering thing increases dopamine. In Ireland, I was just reading, they have certain cities that have, everyone has agreed not to give children cell phones.
I read that
So,
somewhere too.
so if the whole community does it, the kids won't feel like they're left out because nobody has a phone. And I unfortunately, there's kind of the thing that you have to eventually get to, because I mean there are these age restrictions and they come with, it'll turn off at a certain time, but there, so many people are up at night with their phones doing that scrolling thing, and you're cocooned with this light that's just stimulating you.
I can't help but think that all of this is purposeful. This is probably where I'm becoming like little tinfoily, right? So if we, like you said, you read those articles where it says that um, low cholesterol can exacerbate depression, and then how they were giving medications, and it's just the answer is right there. It's so simple in a sense, right? Like, how is that not intentional? I just sometimes wonder, is it really not intentional that they're telling us to go low fat, that they're saying to reduce cholesterol, that they're putting us on HRTs early, that they're putting us on screens and social media where a lot of it is cartoony. I cannot imagine older people really liking the cartoony, the animated filters. It's fun for children. And I think of how in China, for example, who made TikTok, they supposedly have regulations where they can only use it for a certain, the children are only allowed to use it, I think, on the weekends and for a couple hours at most. And the only things that are fed in their newsfeed or whatever they call it are scientific and things to inspire them to become astronauts and inspire them to live a greater life and fulfill their lives. Whereas in America, we are fed it 24/7, and it's dance moves that, yes, they're entertaining and it's fun and it's funny, but we're fed for 5-6 hours or plus however long, and it's just lots of crap information that really benefits you zero. And I just wonder, well, China has that mandate for their own thing in their own country, just like Bayer, who bought Monsanto, that's in Germany. As soon as they bought Monsanto, they banned glyphosate in Germany for that same year, but everywhere else in the world they could spray it. And now I know they're trying to get it removed in Roundup. But how much of this is that everyone knows, but they're just letting it be? And that's just my tinfoil hat, but it's because it's so obvious, right? It just seems so obvious.
I just think that they, unfortunately, the low fat. I mean, when Yudkin and Ansel Keys were, Yudkin's life was ruined because he wrote Pure White and Deadly, and Ansel Keys had his stupid
Right.
7 countries study come out. And at the same exact time, Yudkin could never work again, and Ansel Keys' thing was taken as gospel. So why? Because they wanted to sell statins. I think that mistake that they made, that turning point really came because they can't say that allopregnanolone comes from eating fat. They can't, because that would just negate the entire medical system of, you got to have statins, you got to have this cholesterol, it's going down every year. It's almost like, the emperor's new clothes. If they admit it, it all falls apart. So it's constantly continuing this fake story, and that's what anybody who goes to medical school is learning. They're not learning the other side, because the other people who actually have to leave practice because they learn and they research and they figure out, no, this is not the way. So the sad thing, though, is what you're saying about China is they have that government control to be able to do that, to mandate. And of course, we don't want to have that government control to make us think this, and that we're all going to be, we can be astronauts and the country is great. So it's really sad. And it's sad, just like I said, the thing in Ireland, it seems like such a great idea, but then there's going to be somebody who will feel that this is taking away their free speech and their free. So we have to sort of address it from a scientific and less is that you can't have this because it's not good for you, but you can't have this. It's not good for you because this is what happens to you if you are constantly on your phone. And that's the way that this has to be communicated. And that's really hard.
Right. Or it can be also that we build smaller communities. So we don't go to public school. Like I'll never go to public school anymore because of all of the things we've just mentioned and many other reasons. But in our quasi school place we go to, which is really just a house where a few families go to school, but we have a lot of the similar values. So that's where I was surprised to hear that a few of them, the parents are meat-based or carnivore. And I was shocked to hear that, but I loved it, right? So it's like, oh, okay, my kid's eating mostly fat and meat at their meals. No one questions what they're eating. Even though some of them still eat like the standard American diet, our families are just used to being a little on the fringe, I guess, and it's normalized. So maybe that's a fix, but I can see that how certain people would feel that that's an infringement of their rights. So I get that. I know this is a hard question, but do you think that eating sufficient fat and taking iodine can balance some of that level of xenoestrogens and toxins and maybe anything being imbalanced while you are in the womb? Can fat and iodine fix a lot of the issues?
I think that, yes, I don't think that it can change the hormone signaling for people who have toxic xenoestrogens and they're born with, like the DES babies who are born with, double uteruses and malformed penises. No, obviously that work. And there are even, there are intersex community activists now who are raising public awareness, who are working with birth defect researchers to try to figure out that part of this, and how these problems can be addressed and how to prevent them in the future. So it's not like, but basically we have to accept that these people are part of our society and they're not abnormal because they were malformed by pollution. So that's not, but I think that we know that iodine is a detox mechanism. So it triggers apoptosis, it triggers autophagy in normal and abnormal cells. So it detoxes chemicals, absolutely. And it can protect us from the environment. And that's why I take a lot of it. And why I've increased my dose over the years, because the more crap that's out there, the more I have iodine in me to protect me from it. And the high fat diet will ensure that you have enough stress reserve, because obviously these toxins cause inflammation, and inflammation, we know, goes down in a high fat diet, and you can address the cortisol issues, which also are, it's a vicious circle. Inflammation causes cortisol, and cortisol causes inflammation. So if you can balance your hormones that way by having enough fat in your diet, and then also adequate thyroid function and iodine, I think that that's absolutely is beneficial and protective.
Yeah, even though my boys are really young, so my oldest is only 7, no, 8. I have them eat very high fat because I want them to, be prepped, because I was plant-based when I had them. So I don't know how much that affected them. And sometimes I just wonder, but my hope is that they'll have sufficient levels of testosterone as they're eating very meat-based. I mean, sometimes they eat carbs and it's just the real world, but I hope that they will, that things line up for them, because it is a very toxic environment now that we live in. I see just when I walk down the street, I see our neighbors spraying stuff, and I know it's to kill their weeds. And I just
Yeah.
go to the other side of the street, but I know it's in the air, right? As soon as they spray, and then once it rains, it's all over. But
Yeah.
I think that the best thing we can do for ourselves is our diet, because we really can't control a lot of what's in the environment. And it's just unfortunate, but at least we
We do.
could protect ourselves with the diet.
I think we also have to hold the chemical producing companies responsible, and slowly but surely, I mean, we also have to vote for legislation against these kind of chemicals. I mean, the FDA has been hamstrung since FDR because they made a deal with, they didn't want to suppress growth. So even though there were all these proof that the research was not adequate, and they would always kind of side with the chemical companies because they didn't want to suppress capitalism. So if the FDA is stronger, then we can hold these companies accountable. And that's just so slow in happening.
It is difficult when there are imbalances. Do you think and maybe this is not, there's no answer to this, but do you think it's like a thyroid issue comes first, or like the imbalance, or is it that, is it the dopamine and the cortisol imbalance comes first, or does it even matter?
Well, it depends on when. So when the ectoderm and the endoderm are forming, right? And the baby and the fetus, not even a baby yet, right? What is the first thing that grows, develops, is the thyroid before the neural tube. So the thyroid is the master gland because it's the first one, and the fetus is basically built out from the thyroid. So it's pretty important. And then if you're talking about, and so at that point, there are no adrenals. There are no other hormones. So it all starts with the thyroid. So if we're talking about fetal formation, that is very important because the thyroid also is involved in aromatization, decides how much testosterone is made and how much and estrogen is made, et cetera, et cetera. As we get older, I think it's a combination. I think that cortisol is hugely important in balancing because cortisol levels are inflammatory, and we can lower them and control them by how we eat and how we address stress and lifestyle choices. So I think it changes as the thyroid is always going to be important because it regulates aromatization, but it's so important to address cortisol levels.
And I think all of it, because they're all part of the endocrine system and it's just a fine symphony. I think that it all works together. And so if you support your body, they will naturally all work together, which makes sense.
You're born with a DNA template. All these genes we have they are turned on and off by our environment. So that's why I believe in epigenetics, right? So,
Agreed.
What environment we're in, the good and the bad will go on and off. And as you said, if we take care of our health, and the good will our body is always trying to find its best possible self. It's always trying. That's why we can regenerate. That's why we can heal, because it's always trying to go back to that DNA template that we're born with, which is the ultimate that we can be physiologically and mentally. So I think that's why it's very important to think about it that way, that the body wants to heal. We remove obstacles to healing, it will heal.
So as we talk about that, what do you think about trauma? A lot of people, especially our clientele, the trauma is from their childhood. Maybe they never addressed it. I think a lot of it is the bigger T traumas. Not to say the little traumas don't mean much, but just, whatever the trauma is. But I
Mhm.
see that people that have bigger traumas in their life where they're even willing to acknowledge it to us, they're
Mhm.
some of the sickest. And I just wonder how much of this I'm just going to either forget that this ever happened and ignore it, brush it under the rug, but then their body remembers it. And so now there's this imbalance with the mind and the body. How much do you think that is playing a role? And then people in the future, then those same people that have never addressed their trauma properly or healed from it, that they then are sicker than or more susceptible, or their epigenetics turns on to illnesses of the environment, including mold, including xenoestrogens. They're more sensitive to it than somebody else that may have the same genetics, but it's just not turned on.
Well, I think their immune system is definitely going to be super sensitive. So, okay, so there's something called psychoneuroendocrinology. So it combines the endocrine system with the psyche, right? So this was first the Vietnam veterans who came back with PTSD. PTSD was first became a word in after Vietnam, when the John Mason, who's a Yale psychiatrist, coined the term because he saw the the situation and what was happening with people coming back from the war. The point that he made was that the issue is prolonged stress,
Okay.
prolonged chronic stress. That's really, and it's a domino effect. That at first there's a sympathetic nervous system response, which is the adrenal function, which is cortisol, which will then, if unaddressed, become a thyroid response. So I think that trauma, well, we know that trauma at a young age has this knock-on effect. It's new trauma is nutritionally expensive. So if we will not be able to heal, because we're never going to be able to recover nutritionally. I say nutritionally and psychologically because we've burnt through this. If we had trauma as a child, that it won't be replenished. The issue is, I do believe that it can be replenished. I mean, the example I often give is my daughter almost died in a car accident when she was 18. So she was kept alive. She was in shock, and her adrenals, her cortisol kept her alive. So high, her cortisol was so high because obviously she was in shock, that I had to treat her for 4 years, treat her adrenal function for 4 years, because it had to be replenished, because her brain turned off her ACTH and she had low cortisol after that. So I think that trauma is physical. It can become physical. And can we address it by just the physical? That's what you're asking me, right? I think that it's a combination. I think that functional therapy is helpful because it will actually, there are techniques that can move your trauma into something that you can address without being traumatized by it, by moving from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So yeah, that's a big thing. And do I think that people can't heal because of trauma? I think that takes a lot longer, and it requires really in-depth and being very open-minded about how we address it.
Yeah.
I give some people hypnosis tapes because it moves them from something that they can't think about to something that maybe they will address in the background, that they don't even know they're addressing it.
That makes sense. It's just interesting for us because as we share, some people are suffering from this chronic inflammatory state of this environmental illness. There are some people that are excited as much as they're overwhelmed by it, and then there's some people that are just devastated. And then we always have a questionnaire, not always, well, I guess it depends on the person, but most people will fill out a form from us, and they're a part of it. The question is the trauma, and I'm just seeing a correlation with even the tenacity of eating this way, right? Like, this diet is so hard, but I know it'll get me better. Or and then there's some people that hate it and they're just forcing themselves to eat, and it's just the mindset. I feel that there is a large component of the trauma that's there, where people will say my parents separated and I've just let time heal itself, or my he passed away in front of us in a not so ideal way, right? My time has healed it. But and then some people say they've been through therapy, or some people say they've done XYZ, and you can see it though in their mannerisms and the way that even the writing on their papers of how they deal with things, it's very clear that some people are just affected. And I just wonder how much of that will allow then the carnivore diet to really fully heal you. And maybe it just is, it takes years of more nourishment for that to even get rebalanced. But it just
Mhm.
seems like the mental side is affecting them a lot in healing.
I think that okay, so um, there's a problem with energy. If you have experienced trauma and stress, and your sympathetic nervous system will be highly attuned and overreactive, and you will always have an energy deficiency. And it's really hard to follow the carnivore diet when you have an energy deficiency. So, because in the sense that your sympathetic nervous system is always looking for a stimulant, and that's why stimulant
Mm,
huge part of my removing stimulants is such a huge part of my treatment protocol, because the stimulant will always exacerbate that sympathetic, that almost knee-jerk reflexive hypersympathetic response. So a stimulant, some adrenaline is something that you really have to learn how to tamp down, and people have to change their activities. They have to not exercise, or they have to not stay with certain family members. It gets to be the point where you really, this is where lifestyle changes
right.
really to come into play, because and then I do think people do need more adrenal support in a lot of cases.
Right. No, I fully agree. Why do you think, with all of the information we just talked about, the lots of fat supporting our hormones, which seems so obvious, why is it that healthy hormones are considered to be alleviated with healthy carbohydrates?
Because of those damn papers from the 80s, people put on 800-calorie diets. So if you look it up, do I need carbs for my hormones? It's going to say hypocaloric, you need calories for your hormones. Duh. I mean, you need but the problem is that a low carb diet or a carnivore diet is always equated with diet low calorie, and that's the problem. And you and I are never talking about hypocaloric diets ever. So it's literally from these papers in the 80s that showed that T3 went down when they starved them. And then actually one of those papers showed that when they added 75 grams of carbs, they still had low T3. It was all about calories. So when the calories went up, the hormones were not affected. So it comes from that, and it's just keeps turning up like a bad penny. I mean, we can't get rid of it. The internet just keeps putting it back on
Perpetuating, right?
form, and somebody picks it up, and it's really annoying.
Yeah, it's funny because on a ketogenic or carnivore diet, you'll hear people say, "Oh my gosh, I feel so much better," and then 6 months out, they say the diet tanked their hormones or their thyroid specifically. And it's mostly always that they are under eating.
Yeah, because they started the mindset of I'm on a diet is I need to lose weight,
Mm,
and for me to lose weight, I got to eat less, right? That's how we've been
makes
told
sense.
forever. So they can't get out of that track of any diet. They will eat less. So they'll eat carnivore, but they'll eat one tiny meal a day, or they'll do, fasting, and which will raise their cortisol levels. And it's just, it's very hard we can't erase the internet. They can erase stuff that I'm looking for free. We can't erase that.
Yeah, almost everybody that comes into to our clinic for nutritional therapy, they are all under eating, especially the women. They're all under eating.
Especially the women. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like we can eat sufficient fat to start supporting us, replenishing, nourishing us, and maybe we can right some of this ship that's gone awry. But how about the iodine? So, how much iodine should we be taking? I try to give my boys 1 drop of iodine a day. Sometimes I forget, but I started using putting it in the gelatin capsules because we hated the taste. So that
Oh.
works really well. But is there a certain amount you recommend? Is it for both sexes? I know that males need it too, but do females
Yes.
tend to need it more? I mean, any thoughts?
I would say females need it more, because for the male, obviously all tissues need it.
Right.
The only difference between us and females and males have a prostate, and women have uterus, breasts, ovaries. Males don't have that, and those tissues really need iodine. The second most, I mean, the thyroid takes 6 milligrams and the breasts take 5, and whatever's left goes to the rest. So you definitely need daily. So you definitely need a minimum of 11 milligrams a day in order to give the thyroid in the breast, and then all the other tissues after that. And the problem is that tissues that don't have enough will compete for it. So women need more. How much? They used to say in the 80s that you could get sufficient. If once you were sufficient, 2 drops a day would be enough. But that was before we had, all this toxic waste that we're dealing with every day. So I really use it as a shield. I take 6 drops a day, and I have been forever because of that. That's my shield against all the crap that's out there. That's what my daughter took 10 during her pregnancy because I wanted her to have more. So I do the old patch test for my patients. There's only one. If you're measuring iodine, any test that's not the Hakala lab test is going to be measuring radioactive iodine. And then people get freaked. Oh my God, I got, my iodine's too high. No, it's not the Lugol's. It's measuring for radioactive iodine. So the test is, it's not something that's measuring Chernobyl is what it's measuring. So yeah, I mean, it can be caustic if you drank a liter, but I just don't think that we know that excess. The Hakala lab they give you 50 milligrams, right, and they collect your urine for 24 hours. And that's how they measure how sufficient you are, is because how much comes out in your urine. So whatever we don't need comes out in our urine.
Right. And of all the people that have ever done the Hakala labs with me, no one is sufficient. No one. So there was one that was like 94%. So they were almost there. And I'm sure everybody testing is taking iodine, because otherwise, why would they test? Because they think they're sufficient. And so they're testing, but they're all still deficient. And so I always have to tell them, you have to take more. And oftentimes they'll test fluoride and bromide with it, and they're super high in those. So they have to take even more to displace some of that as well.
You got to detox that stuff. So there's, the iodine will pull it out. Iodine pulls all the stuff out that we don't want.
Yeah. And just for the people listening and watching, bromide is in everything. It's in all your flame retardant stuff. So you think about your pajamas that we put in our little kids, on our furniture, our rugs, so that they're not flame retardant. It's literally on everything. And every time you sit on your couch, you're breathing it in, and then you have more bromide in your system. And then obviously fluoride is everywhere in our waters, and they intentionally put it in our waters as well as our toothpaste and stuff. So it's everywhere.
They need fluoride rotted people's teeth, and they still put it in there. So,
there are some practitioners that test iodine in their blood. Is that, I mean, I was surprised to see that, but is that even a decent way to track your iodine?
I think the only thing is the Hakala lab, because
that's what I figured.
Everything else is going to be radioactive iodine, because that's the medical industry is geared toward iodine evil. If you have iodine in your system, you've just been near a nuke. That's really how they look at it.
So 2 more questions about iodine. So one, I have clients that will take iodine. They feel initially some of them react, but then over time they'll feel fine. But then as they increase, there was one person that told me that their thyroid kind of grew, and so that scared them off, and so they took less. Mm-hmm. What is the mechanistic reasons where some people, they start getting on the higher doses and they don't feel well?
Inflammation. Thyroid inflammation, definitely. What I put in one of the videos is that they actually have to take more to calm it down. They thought you will activate the thyroid. In some places, some people I will have hypertension because they took 2 drops of iodine, and they get very scared. The thing is that you have the thyroid, if you have an iodine deficiency, you all of a sudden you'll be upsetting the status quo, and you will wake up the thyroid. The thyroid will all of a sudden start making hormones that it didn't feel it had the raw materials to make hormones out of. So you might go into a hyperthyroid state temporarily. And what they saw, Stage Means saw, and I think Kimball, they gave 90 milligrams of iodine to calm it down. They basically to basically saturate the thyroid so that for 3 or 4 days it had enough and it didn't have to make hormone anymore. So you got to reduce the inflammation in the thyroid, which goes to diet,
That makes sense because that specific person got scared off, like you said, and then stopped taking it. And yeah, so that's interesting. I interviewed Lynn Farrell, who wrote The Crisis of Iodine, and she swears that the lack of iodine is what caused her breast cancer, and that most women that don't have any genetics or BRCA genes for breast cancer that are getting breast cancer can be because of iodine deficiency.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thyroid
Why
and
why is that?
because the thyroid and the breast tissue need so much iodine
Okay.
that there's not enough, they will compete. And the other thing is that since they put iodized salt on the market in the 20s, there have been more cases of Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's didn't exist in the US until after they put in the iodized salt. Why? Because it was such a tiny amount of iodine that, of course, evaporated as soon as they opened it, right? Sodium iodide, that all it did was make the thyroid want more iodine, which
Oh.
and a huge increase in Hashimoto's.
Sometimes I just think in a very logical sense of if the thyroid is one of the master glands, why is it that we are getting more autoimmune with the thyroid? I mean, it's so pervasive that people have hypothyroid, and I know a lot of our conversation alludes to that. But what about the autoimmune side of it?
Well, the autoimmune side, okay, so autoimmune, lack of any deficiency is going to cause the
Okay.
thyroid to become inflamed. If there's not enough iodine, it'll become inflamed. It won't have to just grow. It can also just become inflamed
Right.
because it is feeling the iodine, the thyroid can overwork itself. So you can have a nodule that grows because you don't have enough iodine, or you can just have inflamed that is tissue that is either being attacked by your immune system, which it's, to me, I absolutely have found that since the thyroid is the master gland, since it's the one that's deciding during adolescence how much building the sexual characteristics, right, in adolescence, if people have stress and trauma at that time, the thyroid will work too hard. There won't be enough iodine. There's never enough iodine, and so that will just start this domino effect of inflammation. The autoimmunity is your body will start to attack the thyroid tissue because there's something going on. There's inflammation there. Kill it, bang, and that leads to other autoimmune conditions: rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis. You turn on that autoimmune trigger, and you don't address it properly, other tissues will start to be attacked by your immune system because your immune system is just friendly fire shooting everything in sight because it sees everything as an antigen.
Right.
So that's gluten and dairy often, and your immune system is attacking proteins.
Right. So as we're wrapping up, how should people start supporting themselves? Maybe they struggle with mental illness. Maybe their child is suffering from anxiety and maybe they're on meds. I mean, how do we start supporting all of this?
Well, definitely a high-fat carnivore diet, definitely some lifestyle changes. I mean, I'm telling people to go to bed at 9 and get their devices away at that time and go to bed. And I mean, we have to start reducing stimulation. So remember the soccer moms, and I don't know if you remember, but there was this whole soccer mom thing yelling on the sideline, kick the goal, sports and push, 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 push. I find that this go, 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 succeed, succeed society today is definitely not helping things. I think people need to step back a bit from achievement.
Yeah.
I guess.
No, I could see that. I could see that. Lately, I've been working on a couple projects, so my sleep has been wonky and I feel it. So, and the small symptoms of adrenal imbalances where I go out and like my eyes feel kind of sensitive to the sun, or if I get up really fast and I feel slightly dizzy, it's just a little bit more pronounced lately. And I'm like, okay, and so that's my check in with myself of, okay, I need to just focus on my sleep better, improve it, or the sleep cycle at least. So I notice it. I absolutely notice it if I'm overstimulating myself. So I totally agree with you.
I can't go paddleboarding 2 days back to back. I won't sleep well the second day because there's no way, even though I did have adrenal issues in the past, I go paddleboarding. I try to do it right in the morning when my cortisol is high as possible. But if I go back to back, I know that I will have abused my adrenal system. So you really have to check in and stuff like that. And but then again, we support ourselves. I think doing research, medication is not the way. It's never the way. You're suppressing a natural response to something. So, unfortunately, we can't. I mean, kids are put on Wellbutrin at 9, which is an antidepressant. And the fat is right there. The fat we know lowers cortisol. We know that it reduces inflammation. We know it reduces aggression. We know it increases serotonin. We know cholesterol does that. So that's really has to be somehow get it out there to make people understand not to avoid fat.
And it is pervasive. So, as much as I have been working with a lot of doctors in the chronic inflammatory response syndrome space, so you would think that they would understand this concept and the importance of the diet with higher cholesterol because of the stress response in the body has gone wildly awry. But many of the doctors, as soon as they meet with a carnivore, their recommendations shift to, we need to do cardiovascular testing on you, right? And just so my hope is that I can share more with them. We have a presentation in July, and so my hope is that I can tell them why, especially for this illness, that everyone needs to be eating high fat and reducing carbs, because there is no diet regimen they need to follow, even though they're suffering from chronic inflammation. And when we check their cortisol and ACTH, all imbalance, DHEA imbalance, testosterone imbalance, and yet they say the diet doesn't matter. All you need to do is follow this certain protocol. And it's like, how does that make sense? So you can eat cup of noodles and frozen processed foods, and it's totally okay as long as you follow their protocol, which is nuts.
Yeah, they're not taught nutrition. They're just not taught nutrition.
I know, it's very, very obvious to me.
Yes, that's wow.
Yeah. So, and then they recommend eating fiber for the gut, and it's just, yeah, I
Oh,
know
oh.
it's I'm back to meeting with standard American dieters, but I'm, like as more and more people learn about carnivore, this is why it's so important for other practitioners to learn, because I think there's a movement right now where I've heard many people, even in the graduate school that I've graduated, the nutritional therapy school, I hear a lot of the people graduating from there, they're listening to these people that are, I guess, bigger in the wellness space, that are saying that actually the new HRT movement and studies show that it's safe, there's no risk of cancer, and all of these are fine, and why not age gracefully? And so majority of the people in the same school that I've graduated from now are in the camp of, I think it's okay to take HRTs. And
Yeah.
so maybe you could touch upon that for a second, of
Age,
why.
age gracefully. What does that, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, women have always aged gracefully. I'm going back to the labiaplasty thing. I was really freaked out. I asked my daughter about it, who told me that she's 35 and she has a beautiful nose, right? But it has, it has this Roman aquiline nose. And her Instagram is always sending her stuff about nose jobs, nose jobs, they somehow, I mean, and she told me that women are now getting vaginal tightening surgery, say, because supposedly menopausal women and women who've had babies have their vaginas are too big. Jesus Christ. Real Housewives, somebody, and then Khloe Kardashian had
They all did it.
yes. So it's, the aesthetics it's just sell. Boy, it just makes me so mad. The fat is right there. Ladies, the fat is what we need. We need to eat the fat that balances our hormones. There is no safe HRT, because all HRT is made out of phytosterols, which are synthetic, and the body will always see it as synthetic. And yes, the phytosterols, diethylstilbetrol, all of the stuff made from yams, it's still going to give your body, it's a xenoestrogen. It's a xenoestrogen. So we know that any kind of xenoestrogen has bad side effects.
I have a client that's in her 70s, and when I first worked with her, she looks really good, but she's been taking thyroid medication, and I think 3 different sex hormone supplements or medications, or I don't, HRTs. But she said she takes the same doses when she was in her 40s. And I said, ooh, that can't be good for you. And so I just lightly told her, because I like to meet my clients where they are. And I just said, there are risks with taking it. Anyways, I think 3 sessions later, she was diagnosed with cancer. And yeah, so she's moving towards high fat, but it's just sad when I see that. And obviously I can't attribute for sure that it was the hormone she was taking, but it's I know that there's a push for these HRTs lately and that it's safe enough and doesn't cause cancer, but there's always a risk when you're inputting in your body something that's not natural. And as much as you say they're natural because they're identical, but they're not from your body. It's like us eating lab grown meat and saying, but they're identical. They're from the cell cultures of an animal. It's not the same thing. And I just think, yeah, I'm fully on the same page with you. I think maybe once in a blue moon, someone needs it for something. But I think if we can fix it with diet first, that's
I
the
don't
approach we should go.
for anything. I think
Okay.
that
Okay.
absolutely no, because if there's an imbalance in how they are able to regulate their hormones, that's because of thyroid and adrenal function.
Okay.
Absolutely no. It's the yam stuff, the phytosterol. It's not identical. It's a xenoestrogen, and it should be seen that way. And our body makes our going back to the DNA template. We evolved to make this stuff naturally on our own.
Right.
So if you can't make it naturally on our own, that has to be fixed. You shouldn't be dumping something in that you're supposedly deficient in. And women shouldn't even be tested for estrogen and testosterone levels. I don't even look at them. They send them to me. I didn't even look at them because if you're eating fat and your thyroid works and you're taking iodine, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The ovarian estrogen is only necessary and progesterone only necessary if you want to have a baby. So it's only right there if you fertilize an egg. The rest of it all comes from the adrenals, from birth to death.
Yeah, my mom is 71. She's never been on any type of hormone medication. She looks very young for her age. So I just think, well, if my mom didn't need it, I mean, that's just the simplified way I think of it. My mom didn't need it. She's aging gracefully or whatever they want to call gracefully. And she eats a very high fat meat diet. And yeah, she eats a little bit of plants here and there. But I mean, she doesn't take any medications now at all. She was on diabetic medications, cholesterol, all of that, and inhalers for her asthma from her diabetes, and had all the swelling in her feet, and she has none of that now. And so I just think, well, she went carnivore and now more plant or keto carnivore in her mid 60s, and she's doing well. So why can't, I don't know, but
a lot of people say they do it because they had hot flashes or they cry. What is that? That is adrenal. That is adrenal. So it has nothing to do with the lack of estrogen. The reason why they feel good for a bit, as I said before, is that
stimulant.
Yes, it's a stimulant. Estrogen cortisol levels, and just like you go in the sauna or in the ice bath or do a triathlon, yeah, you feel great, and then you crash. So,
Yeah, and I see some females that take testosterone for a long period of time. Their voices start changing and their face, they're starting to look slightly different. It's very subtle, but I can tell in the wellness space, the people that are slightly taking testosterone, you could see it. And it's interesting.
Clients who have been on testosterone and they have very serious issues.
Okay, right.
Having taken it.
Right. Well, thank you. I just appreciate your just sober truths about a lot of this information and how simple the fix can be sometimes. And I know that we all want a simple answer by like, if I could just take this one medication or supplement, or no, it's just a patch, or I just put it on my tongue, and then it's so natural. And they sell me on it, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe we could slow down on the dosage then. But yeah, thank you. Where can people find you? And I know you share little clips on these educational resources. Is that on your YouTube channel? If you can mention your Instagram
channel, and I do those when I can. I'm pretty busy, and I think I want to write that other book, but I can't see people if I'm writing this book. So it definitely has. But yeah, the YouTube, Instagram. I'm not as busy as many people are on Instagram, but I try to say things. But usually I just get pissed off when I read an article and I have to write something. Other than that, I'm just working. But the book is now on Audible. Good Fat Women Menopause is going to be at the end, a couple of days out as an Audible version. So that's really cool. I picked a narrator who sounds not menopausal. So hoping to sort of prick the ear of younger women. So I'm pretty excited about that. It was really cool to have my book read back to me. It was, wow.
No, that is cool. Do they get the intonations right? Because when I was I debated not having debated if I should do it or if I have someone else. And I always
Yeah.
wondered, would they get the intonation right?
Yeah, well, they give you test these people, they read a piece of, my daughter says, why don't you do it? I'm like, I don't have time. And they all read something, you pick something for them to read, and this one just got it just right. I mean,
Oh,
just
that's
perfect.
perfect. That's awesome.
So I was really happy about that.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, doing audio recordings is hard. After I did my first book, I said I never want to do that again. It's not my thing. I totally get it. Well, thank you so much for joining me again today. It's always a pleasure and it's so fun to talk to you about just high fat carnivore and how diet in this aspect can help so much for healing and, at least have be a good starting point to see what else you may have to fit because there might be some lifestyle things you have to do or some of the hypnosis or some trauma identification and there might be other things, but at the baseline if we eat a high fat diet with some iodine, I think we can do a body good.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. It's always fun.
Okay, guys, I hope that this interview brings you encouragement in ways that if you find imbalances, that you can be supported by eating a high fat carnivore diet with some supplementary iodine. Our practice recommends a lot of iodine for our clients as well, as a lot of our clients are hypothyroid or have Hashimoto's or Graves or is suffering from some imbalances in sex hormones and are on some type of HRTs. It's not always easy to just get off HRTs or just change your thyroid medication. So always work with a professional that you trust. But know that diet is so important in all of this imbalances and getting supported to optimal healing without taking much medication. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.